She found a wounded cowboy in the woods, unaware he was a millionaire who owned half the county, and the sky had turned the color of ash. June's boots hit the dry, cracking earth as she rounded the bend behind the foothills, her hands sore from hauling weeds all morning. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. Thick black smoke coiled into the sky, rising fast from the edge of the forest that bordered the old Carter Ranch, land long abandoned after the droughts hit.
"God almighty!"
she whispered, dropping her gardening shears and breaking into a sprint. The smell hit her before the heat did, a sharp, burning tang of pine needles and dry bark. Flames danced across the treetops, leaping like wild beasts from one brittle limb to another. Somewhere in the chaos, a tree exploded with a cracking boom. She veered off the main path, covering her mouth with the edge of her shirt. Her eyes stung from the smoke, but something else cut through the rising panic. A sound, a voice, faint, strangled. "Help!" June spun around. "Hello? Who's there?" The smoke thickened as she pushed through a bramble of scorched shrubs, ducking under a half-connected pine. The heat closed in like a living wall, pressing against her skin. But the groan came again, clearer now. That was not an animal. Just ahead, tangled in scorched branches and half-buried in ash, a man lay motionless. He was shirtless, his back a mess of burns and scrapes. One leg bent at a sickening angle. Ropes had been used to tie his wrists, though one had snapped. His face was caked in soot, a trickle of blood trailing from his temple. June's heart slammed against her ribs. "Hey, can you hear me?" she shouted, stumbling toward him. His lips moved, barely. Then she heard it, above the roar of the fire, a groan loud and deep. She looked up and saw it. A massive pine, engulfed in flame, its roots already blackened, was tipping slowly forward. Straight toward them. "Hang on!" June threw herself down, looping her arms beneath his shoulders. The man moaned in agony. Her own muscles screamed in protest, but adrenaline drowned out pain. She heaved once, twice. The burning tree cracked. With one last desperate pull, she dragged him just far enough that the trunk slammed down inches behind his boots, sending a storm of embers and sparks into the air. June collapsed beside him, coughing violently. Her eyes streamed tears as heat rolled over them in waves. She grabbed his arm and began to drag him, inch by painful inch, through the underbrush. Every step was a battle, his weight unbearable, her strength fading. Cinders rained down around them. One ember caught the end of her braid, and she slapped it out with shaking fingers. Her lungs burned, her feet stumbled, but she did not stop. The world became a blur of smoke and fire and groans of wind-fed flame. Finally, the smoke thinned. She broke through the edge of the woods and into the scrubland behind her shack. Her vision spotted as she reached the fence and flung it open, dragging the man through like a rag doll. She collapsed just inside, gasping, only to hear him whisper once more before slipping into unconsciousness. "Please, don't leave me." June pulled him the last few yards to her porch, flung the door open and half-carried, half-dragged him inside. Her small cabin, cobbled together with salvaged boards and patched tin, wasn't much, but it was dry and safe. She laid him down on the cot by the fireplace, sweat dripping into her eyes. "Stay with me," she murmured, brushing soot from his forehead. "You didn't survive a fire just to die now." Her hands moved on instinct. She fetched water from the pump, tore up a clean shirt to make bandages. She cleaned the gash on his temple, wrapped his broken leg with what braces she had. His back was covered in angry burns, and she carefully spread a poultice of plantain and comfrey over them, whispering soft reassurances, even though she was not sure he heard. She trimmed away the charred fabric on his pants and shirt and found a scorched patch of leather near his hip. A brand, maybe. She did not linger. The stench of smoke still clung to them both. When she removed the last of the ash from his face, she paused. Beneath the blood and soot was a man perhaps in his 30s. Rough features, a square jaw, lips drawn tight even in sleep. He looked like a fighter, a stubborn one. She pulled a blanket over him, lit a small lantern, and sat on the floor beside him, too exhausted to weep. The fire outside was still raging across the forest, but in her shack there was only silence, and one unconscious cowboy who, for now, belonged to no one but the flames and the woman who had pulled him from them. The wind howled through the gaps in the cabin's patched walls, rattling loose boards and whispering through the cracks like ghosts from the fire. June knelt beside the cot, wringing out a damp cloth in a bowl of lukewarm water. She pressed it to Luke's brow, watching his face contort in pain even in unconsciousness. His skin was clammy, his breath shallow. Fever had taken hold. She leaned closer, whispering like a prayer, "Come on, do not quit on me now." Luke stirred, his eyes fluttered open, wild and unfocused, flickering across the ceiling until they landed on her face. Where am I?" "You're safe," she said gently. "I pulled you from the fire." He tried to rise, then gasped as pain jolted through his spine. "What fire?" "The one that nearly cooked you," June replied, steadying him. "Lie back. You are not ready to move." He shook her hand off. "Don't touch me!" June straightened slowly, brushing her apron with steady fingers. "All right, but you won't get far on one leg and a back full of splinters," his voice rasped. "What do you want from me?" The question stunned her. She blinked once, then replied quietly, "Nothing. Just don't die in my cabin, that's all." She walked away, pretending not to hear his angry mutter as she stirred the pot over the fire. That night, silence filled the space like smoke, thick and uneasy. The next few days passed in tense routine. June treated his wounds, changed bandages and made soup. Luke refused to eat if she hovered, so she left it by his cot. He only ate when she was not looking. He insisted on doing everything himself, even when his body trembled with the effort. He was like a wounded animal, furious, proud, and cornered. He would not answer questions beyond his first name, Luke. Every kindness was met with suspicion, every gesture with a growl. Still, June stayed. She read aloud at night, mostly cowboy novels and Bible verses. She fixed the roof when a storm rolled through. One night, when the fire threatened to go out, she slipped another blanket over his shivering form. He cracked an eye open just in time to see her crouched by the fire, quietly sewing the ripped sleeve of his only shirt. He closed his eyes again, tighter this time, not from pain but something deeper. By the end of the second week, Luke could sit up. June moved a chair next to the window so he could watch the goats and chickens that wandered through the yard. He still did not speak unless necessary, but his eyes followed her when she moved around the room. One morning, June returned from the woods with a bundle of herbs and her boots caked in mud. She paused at the doorway, surprised to see Luke outside, leaning against the post, feeding the old goat. He grumbled at it like it owed him money. She said nothing, just watched. That night, after dinner, he cleared his throat. "Why'd you save me?" "Someone had to," she replied. "That's not enough." She met his eyes. "It is for me." He glanced down. "You should have left me. Would have been easier." She hesitated, then said, "Easier isn't always right." He swallowed hard. "I don't remember who I was, but I have a feeling I wasn't worth saving." June walked to him slowly, knelt beside his chair. "Then you get to decide who you are now." He stared at her hands, scarred, weathered, gentle. "You stayed," he murmured, "even when I gave you every reason not to. I've lived long enough to know people are more than the worst day they've had." His voice cracked. "Thank you." She stood, touching his shoulder lightly before returning to the fire. Outside, the wind still moaned through the trees, but inside something else stirred. Not trust, not yet, but something close. Something with the shape of hope. The nightmare started on the fifth night of real sleep. Luke jolted upright on the cot, drenched in sweat, chest heaving as though he had just sprinted miles. The fire was always the same, crackling too loud, smoke curling into lungs he could not control. Shadows dancing against trees as a voice screamed his name, and then, always then, a flash of something metal, a blow to the side of the head, and blackness. June was already at his side, a glass of water in hand. "Same dream?" He didn't answer, just drank, eyes wide and distant. But as she turned to adjust the blankets, he whispered, "There was someone else there, in the fire." June paused. "Someone who hurt you?" He nodded slowly. "I think so. A man. Looked like me." The words hung in the air, thick with tension neither of them could explain. The next morning, June sorted through the bundle of clothing she had managed to salvage from the fire. Most of it was too torn or burned to keep, but one jacket, scorched at the hem, still had an inner pocket intact. She reached in, fingers brushing against something hard and cold. It was a ring, heavy, gold, slightly tarnished but intact. Her breath caught when she saw the engraving inside. L.C. Morgan June stared at the initials, her pulse quickening. She knew that name. Everyone in this forgotten stretch of land knew that name, Morgan Estate, a legacy of ranchers turned developers who had once owned nearly everything in this county, including the patch of earth her family once called home. Her father used to curse the name Morgan like it was a storm that never passed. "They take and take," he once muttered, staring at their eviction notice. "Come day, they'll fall just as hard." She walked slowly back to the cabin, the ring wrapped in a cloth in her hand. Luke was sitting by the window, his healing leg propped on a stool, lost in another daze. "I found this," she said gently, setting the bundle on the table. He picked it up with curious fingers, turning the gold over in his hand. Then his breath caught. "I've seen this before," he whispered. June watched him carefully. "Do you know what the initials mean?" "L.C. Morgan." His voice was low, almost reverent. "Lucas Carter Morgan, that's me." He stood, or tried to, but faltered, his legs still weak. June caught him by the arm as he lowered himself back into the chair, the ring clutched tightly in his fist. "I remember. The house on the ridge, the stables, the old barn with the broken weather vane, my mother's roses, and my brother." He paused, eyes darkening. "Nathan." He was always quieter, more reserved. "We argued a lot, especially after our father died. There was something about the land. He wanted to sell, I didn't." He looked up at June then, eyes blazing with a sudden, awful clarity. "He hit me, that night, in the woods. I went to stop something, a deal maybe. I tried to stop him and he left me to die." June didn't move. The weight of the revelation settled like dust between them, thick and choking. "You're saying you're the Luke Morgan," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Luke nodded, the name no longer a question but a burden. She backed away, as though his name had become fire. "My father died because of the Morgans," she said quietly. "We lost everything, this land, this shack. It's all we had left after the estate took our farm." Luke closed his eyes. "I didn't know. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean," she echoed bitterly. "But you did it. Your family did." Silence stretched. The air was colder now. Luke looked down at his hands, scraped, bruised, healing, but still so far from steady. "I don't deserve to be here," he said. "Not in your home, not after everything." June didn't speak for a long time. She stared at the man in front of her, still broken, still unsure, but no longer a stranger, a man who had once been powerful, untouchable. Now, just a name torn loose from its legacy. Then finally she said, "You were half dead in a fire when I found you. I didn't ask your name then. I don't regret what I did. But that doesn't mean I can forget what your name means to me." He looked at her, the pain in his face deeper than any bruise. "I thought I was saving a man," she said softly, "not dragging a ghost back from the past." Luke lowered his head. "You did save me, even if I didn't deserve it." June walked to the door, needing air, needing space. As she stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of charred wood, memories still hanging like ash in the sky. Inside, Luke sat with the ring in his palm, turning it again and again, as if hoping it might show him a different story, one where he had not let everything burn. The morning fog had barely lifted when Luke tried to leave. He waited until June went to the river, carrying a basket of laundry down the winding trail behind the cabin. The moment she was out of sight, he grabbed the walking stick she had carved from an old fence post and pulled on the boots she insisted he try wearing again. His legs screamed in protest, the half-healed fracture pulsing with fire beneath the bandages. But he gritted his teeth and stepped toward the door. Every step felt like betrayal, not just of her kindness, but of something else, something he was afraid to name. Gratitude? Guilt? Love? The answer didn't matter. What mattered was that he didn't deserve any of it. Not her tending to his wounds, not the meals she cooked over a sputtering fire, not the way she still sang old songs in the evening like there wasn't a ghost of a name between them. He reached the edge of the clearing before his leg buckled. The pain hit like lightning, and he fell hard, landing face first in the dirt. A sharp cry escaped his throat, half curse, half confession. "Luke!" Her voice snapped through the trees like a whip. She was running, the laundry basket forgotten on the trail, her boots skidding in the mud. He tried to wave her off. "Don't!" he gasped, ashamed. But she was already there, kneeling beside him, her arms looping under his. "Stop being stubborn. Let me help." He clenched his jaw. "I don't want your pity." "You don't have it," she said, grunting as she pulled him up. "What you have is a body that's still healing and a head full of guilt that weighs more than your own pride." He didn't answer. Couldn't. She guided him back to the cot, each step a reminder that strength meant nothing if the heart was too weak to carry it. Later that evening, Luke sat staring at the flickering lamp on the table. June was humming again, quietly mending a torn sleeve of his shirt by the fire. Her fingers moved like she had been born doing this, slow, careful, sure. He watched her in silence, every breath inside him caught between wanting to stay and fearing he had no right to. That night he couldn't sleep. The wind outside rustled through the patchy shingles of the roof. From his cot he could see her curled up under a thin quilt across the room, hair falling over her cheek, peaceful, as if carrying a stranger's broken body for weeks had not cost her anything. Luke reached for the pencil on the nightstand and the back of a faded receipt she had left from the store in town. With shaky hands, he scribbled a few crooked lines. "June, you saved me when you didn't have to. You saw a man who didn't even know himself and gave him a name worth answering to. I don't deserve your care. I don't deserve you. But I'm sorry for everything my name did to your life, and for trying to walk away like it meant nothing. Thank you, Luke." He folded the paper and crept quietly toward her coat, which hung on a nail by the door. He slipped the note into the front pocket and turned back, heart pounding louder than the wind outside. In the quiet, he whispered into the dark, "I'm still broken, but maybe I don't want to be." And for the first time since he'd woken in her cabin, he let the tears fall, soft and silent, as the storm of his own shame began finally to settle. The knock on the cabin door came just after sunrise. Luke was seated near the window, his injured leg propped up, eyes fixed on the hills blanketed in morning mist. June was boiling water for tea when she looked up and froze. There was a man outside, not a hunter, not a ranger. His suit was dusty but sharp, and his briefcase was clasped tightly, like he had walked miles without stopping. Luke opened the door slowly. The man took off his hat. "Lucas Morgan?" Luke didn't answer right away. Then, with quiet certainty, he nodded. "I'm Graham Sutter," the man said. "Your father's old legal counsel. I've been looking for you ever since the fire." June hovered nearby, uncertain. Luke stepped out into the light. "You knew I was alive?" "Rumors," Graham admitted. "But I never gave up. I was at the hearing when your brother declared you unstable, said you vanished after a breakdown, that the fire was your doing." June gasped. What?" Graham handed over a folder. Luke opened it slowly, his eyes scanning forged reports, signatures he recognized but didn't remember signing. "Filed for emergency guardianship," Graham said, voice heavy. "Claimed you'd lost mental stability. While you were missing, he transferred the property deeds, liquidated assets, and sold off large tracts of land illegally." Luke's fingers clenched around the paper. His breath grew shallow, eyes darkening. "So he wins," he whispered. "He burns it all, takes what's left, paints me as the madman. Just like our father always warned." June placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You have proof now." "I have rage," Luke snapped, louder than he intended. "And a name that means nothing anymore." "No," she said softly. "You have a choice." He turned to her, eyes burning. "What choice, June? To pretend it's all fine? He tried to kill me. Then fight him," she said, steady. "But not like him. Don't let revenge define your return." Luke paced, limping back and forth on the cabin's creaking floor. "Henrik Lamb took everything from me." "You still have your name," she said. "Your story. Use it. Not a gun, not a matchstick. There was silence. Graham spoke again, choosing his words carefully. If you're willing to testify, to let the world see you're alive and lucid, we can press criminal charges, fraud, arson, attempted murder. Luke turned to him. But I'll have to face them all. The press, the board, the people who already think I'm insane. Graham nodded. Yes. Luke looked at June. You pulled me from the fire, he said, voice cracking, and I've been hiding ever since. June didn't blink. Then stop hiding. He limped to the table, gripping the edge for balance. His hand shook as he reached for the pen Graham offered. He signed. That night, the sky turned from crimson to deep navy. June sat outside, mending a tear in Luke's old coat. He joined her, slowly lowering himself to the step beside her. I wanted to kill him, Luke confessed. Every day I couldn't walk. I dreamed of wrapping my hands around his throat. She didn't flinch. But today, he said, when you looked at me like I was still worth something, it made me want to win differently. She smiled, threading the needle with care. Then you're already stronger than you were yesterday. Luke stared out into the dark trees. It'll be dangerous. If he knows I'm alive, he won't stop. I'm not afraid of him, June replied. He looked at her for a long time. You should be, he whispered. She smiled gently. I was afraid of being alone forever. Then you fell from the sky. Maybe not with wings, but you're here. Luke's eyes glistened. For the first time, he didn't look away. The courtroom was packed. Locals, journalists, ranchers, every seat was taken. The air was thick with anticipation. Whispers filled the wooden-paneled room as the door creaked open and Luke stepped inside. He walked slowly, a cane in one hand, June's arm in the other. His limp was noticeable, his frame leaner, but his head was held high. The judge looked up. Silence swept the room. Mr. Lucas Carter Morgan, the bailiff announced, here to testify on charges of fraud, perjury, and arson against Richard Morgan. Gasps rippled. Cameras clicked, but Luke didn't flinch. He took the stand, adjusted the microphone, and began. My name is Lucas Morgan, he said. 3 months ago I was left for dead in a forest fire, set to cover up crimes my own brother committed. I survived thanks to the kindness of a stranger. And today, I'm here to tell the truth. He reached into his coat, pulling out a stack of documents, burnt at the corners, but legible. Graham stepped forward, handing copies to the court. These are land transfer papers, filed without my consent. My signature was forged, my medical records were falsified, and my brother claimed I was unfit to manage my estate. The opposing attorney stood. Objection, this is hearsay. Luke turned, voice steady. Then let me make it fact. He continued, detailing the fire, the threats, the night he confronted Richard, only to be struck from behind and abandoned. I woke up, broken, he said, with no memory, no name. But what I remember clearly, what I will never forget, is the sound of her voice when she found me. June saved my life, and when my memory returned, so did my reason to stand. The judge leaned forward. Do you have corroborating evidence? Graham nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Signed confessions from 2 former estate workers who witnessed the assault, financial records tracing illegal transfers, and forensic analysis confirming the fire's origin point. The judge reviewed the materials. Across the room, Richard Morgan, seated with his high-priced legal team, shifted uncomfortably. Then, Luke did something no one expected. He turned toward the gallery, where townsfolk sat, some with arms crossed, others with folded hands. My family once owned most of this county, he said, and we failed you. We displaced farmers, bulldozed homes, claimed it was for growth. It wasn't. He looked directly at a woman in the 3rd row, her weathered face streaked with tears. Your husband died trying to fight back. I remember his then at an old man near the aisle. You lost your ranch in 9. That deed was one of the first forged. And then he looked at June. Her father died believing no one cared, and maybe I didn't back then. But I do now. He turned to the judge. If this court allows, I'd like to return the lands taken through illegal means. All of them. Gasps again, murmurs. The judge's gavel struck wood. Order. Mr. Morgan, are you stating you're relinquishing your legal claim? I'm restoring what never should have been taken, Luke said. That's not charity, it's justice. The court recessed. Within the hour, Richard Morgan was arrested. Charges included conspiracy, attempted murder, and arson. He was led out in handcuffs, his face pale, jaw tight. But Luke didn't watch him go. He stood beside June, in front of the courthouse, where reporters now swarmed. Flashes went off, microphones shoved forward. But he didn't speak to them. He turned to her. I didn't win anything today, he said quietly. I gave back what should have never been mine. But I think, he hesitated, I'm starting to find something that is. June smiled, her eyes reflecting the midday sun. You found your way back? No, he corrected gently. You brought me back. And for the first time since the fire, Lucas Carter Morgan, cowboy, heir, survivor, stood tall, not as the man who lost everything, but as the one who chose to rebuild it the right way. The wind carried the scent of ash and wildflowers as Luke climbed the hill slowly, no longer leaning on a cane. Each step was measured, but his resolve was firm. At the clearing, the old cabin still stood, weather-worn and crooked, but intact. And so was she. June sat on the porch, a basket of wild herbs in her lap, watching quietly as he approached. No words, just waiting. He stopped a few feet away, placed the walking stick gently on the ground. I do not need it anymore, he said, voice hoarse. I walked here, on my own. June's eyes shimmered, but she nodded. I know. Luke took another step. I thought surviving the fire was the hard part, but living after, with the shame, the guilt, that was. June stood, her hands gripping the basket. You do not owe me anything. But I do, he replied. Not because you saved me from the flames, but because you stayed. You made me believe I could be more than broken. Her gaze dropped. Luke stepped close. I did not stand up alone, he said. You lifted me. You gave me back my life. June reached out and touched his face, soft, trembling, like the first time she had tended his burns. Only now, there was peace in her eyes. Weeks passed, the cabin was repaired, but Luke had other plans. He bought back the old Morgan ranch, not to restore power but purpose. The barns became classrooms. The stables opened to kids who had never seen a horse. The fields bloomed with vegetables, herbs, wildflowers. He built a school for riding, farming, mending fences, free for children of working families. June ran the kitchen, taught sewing, kept wild honey in a jar by the window. They moved into the ranch house, but the cabin remained. Luke gave it to June, not as repayment, but reverence. This place saved me, he told her. And so did you, she smiled. Then fix the hinges this time. He laughed, truly laughed for the first time in years. One golden evening they walked together along the wildflower fields. Near the place where her father once planted sunflowers, now tall and swaying again, they paused. Luke knelt, touched the soil. I thought justice meant taking back what was mine, but maybe it means restoring what was lost, for everyone. June knelt beside him. You did that. No, he said. We did. He took her hands, rough palms meeting hers. You could have left me, he said. You had every reason to. But not the heart, she answered. He pressed her hands over his chest. You gave me more than mercy. You gave me a reason to live, and now I live to hold on to you. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. There, in the land once burned by betrayal, they held each other, not as broken souls, but as partners in healing, not for what they had lost, but for what they had chosen to build. Together. The spring air was sweet with blooming wildflowers and the laughter of children as the sun rose high above Morgan Ranch. A year had passed, and the once barren land now breathed again. Golden wheat swayed in the wind. Rows of sunflowers stretched toward the sky, and horses grazed in open pastures that no longer belonged to greed, but to the people. A handmade banner hung above the wooden gate. Spring Festival, a new beginning. Tents dotted the fields, offering lemonade, pies, and jars of June's wild honey. Kids painted their faces and raced each other through hay bales. Elderly farmers who had once been forced off this land now walked its paths with teary eyes and muddy boots, welcomed home not with pity, but with pride. At the center stood a small stage made from old barnwood, surrounded by hay bales for seating. Luke stood there, hat in hand, looking out at the crowd. He was no longer the broken man dragged from the fire. He wore his scars with quiet strength, moved with a slight limp, but his eyes were clear. Confidence did not blaze from him. It flowed, quietly, like a stream that had learned to bend with the earth instead of fighting it. June stood off to the side, helping a group of children line up for a song performance. Her dress was simple, her hair braided back, and her smile lit up the field more than the spring sun. Luke raised his hand. The chatter quieted. "I am not good with speeches," he began, and a few chuckles echoed. "But I've learned that when life burns everything to the ground, you can either stay buried in the ashes or rise with something new." He looked around slowly, meeting faces he once feared would never forgive the Morgan name. "I used to ride these fields thinking I owned the world," he said, "but I didn't. I was just a cowboy too proud to see the dust rising behind me." There was silence, save for the wind rustling through the wildflowers. "Then the fire came," Luke said, voice lower, "and I lost everything. My memory, my land, my name. I woke up not knowing who I was, but someone found me." He turned to where June stood, her hands now still, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't ask what I had. She didn't care who I was. She just saw someone hurt and stayed. Luke swallowed hard. "I told her I wasn't worth saving, that my life was nothing but mistakes, but she looked me in the eye and said, 'Maybe that's why you need someone to believe in you.'" June blinked rapidly. The children beside her held her hands, sensing something deep was happening. Luke took a breath. "I stand here today not because I healed," he said, "but because someone else refused to let me fall. I was a cowboy who had lost everything, until she took the reins and pulled me back from the edge." The crowd stood quiet, breath held. Luke stepped back, letting the words settle like seeds in the spring soil. And then, slowly, applause rose. First soft, then thunderous. June walked up to the stage, not because anyone asked her to, but because her heart did. She took Luke's hand, and he looked at her the way a man looks at the very thing he once believed he'd never deserve. He turned to her, lowering his voice, and said, just for her, "You didn't heal me with herbs or bandages. You healed me with something rarer. Human kindness in a land scorched bare." She smiled, pressed her forehead to his, and whispered, "You were never lost, Luke, just waiting to come home." And there, in the heart of Morgan Ranch, surrounded by wildflowers, friends, and the echoes of 1,000 second chances, the cowboy and the seamstress stood together, not as savior and saved, but as partners who had stitched together a new story from the ashes of the old. And that was the story of June and Luke, two souls scarred by fire, stitched together by grace. Sometimes it's not the grand gestures or the sweeping rescues that change a life. Sometimes it's a quiet act of compassion, a stubborn belief that someone deserves another chance, even when they've stopped believing it themselves. Luke thought he had lost everything. June had nothing to give but kindness. Yet from the ashes of their pasts, they built a future. One where land was shared, hearts were healed, and no one was left behind. Because in a world that burns too easily, love is the bravest thing to grow. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories for more tales that heal, inspire, and remind us what really matters. And remember, sometimes the most powerful miracles come not from magic, but from one person who refuses to give up on another. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.